October 4th, 2019. Thank God for the critics, which has helped wash away all the trash and garbage off the sidewalks. The animals come out at night. The plagiarizers, the fanboys, the clowns. Someday, a real movie critic will come along and wash Joker off the streets. Nah, not really. Joker is still an awesome movie. Hello everyone, I'm That Other George, and I've had quite the history with Joker on this channel before. I've defended it from the media mob. I've responded to Ralph the Movie Maker's bad takes.
I won.
And I responded to this ridiculous idea of a Joker or any other piece of media being overrated. They're up there with some of the most popular videos on my channel. And I just wanted to give a huge thank you to all of those who watched, supported those, and have stuck around ever since. And I appreciate the vast majority of you for being sort of mature enough to understand that those videos are just simply critiques. They're not personal attacks against anyone I criticized within them. Because despite giving multiple disclaimers and putting up barriers in place, certain people just kept walking straight into them. But we won't be taking a look at any of those comments today. Instead, I want to concentrate on this idea of Joker being this shameless rip-off of classic Scorsese movies such as Taxi Driver and, of course, The King of Comedy. Because this is something I've countered in my previous Joker videos, but not as extensively as I would like to. And I want to bury this argument once and for all. So I'm feeling pretty motivated to tackle this argument today. And again, keep in mind going forward that nothing is exempt from criticism. And that includes criticism itself.
Always coming up with these great lines. I love them. You're wonderful. You're wonderful.
When you actually take a second to think about the film you just watched, it's a completely unoriginal, bland superhero movie that takes from Taxi Driver and King of Comedy.
Famous visual beats of Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver and also Martin Scorsese's The King of Comedy, complete with Robert De Niro cameo.
I guess I was more just shocked that when they said they were taking inspiration from intimate Martin Scorsese character studies, that they would be quite so literal.
So heavily inspired by Scorsese, and it's not inspired, it really just rips him off.
If you're not careful, that influence can seep its way into the project you're working on, so much so that you start emulating and replicating your influence instead of questioning or deconstructing it.
Sigh, eye roll.
No, you cannot joke about that.
But seriously, I recently rewatched Taxi Driver, The King of Comedy, and Joker, all back to back. And I figured watching them this way wouldn't necessarily force me to take back the position I held in the past, but would at least help highlight a few more significant instances of imitation. But if anything, watching them this way only highlighted more unique things in Joker. Also, I need to make clear that comparing films and explaining why you think one is better than the other is not an issue at all. You can say, I don't know, Taxi Driver balances themes better than Joker, and what you'd have to do is analyze the themes in both films and just explain why you think Taxi Driver works better in certain ways or something. But just simply saying Joker bad because Taxi Driver exists is such a non-argument. Each piece of media can be compared to one another, but they need to be criticized on their own as well. I've gone over this before, but I need to make my position as clear as possible here.
I understand.
When I do see people talking about this topic, it feels like any semblance of nuance has just been completely chucked out the window. Because plagiarism, clone, imitation, homage, copy, inspiration, all of these words vary quite significantly on the spectrum. and not defining where Joker falls on this spectrum and instead just accepting at face value that it's nothing more than a downgraded Scorsese film, seems like quite the closed-minded position to hold. And the ironic thing about this whole argument is that it's not a unique point to make. You see, from what I've gathered, the reason as to why people hold this position is because they see it pop up in various videos, like the ones you saw in the montage earlier. So what happens is someone clicks on a video that's hypothetically titled Joker-George the film creator, and rather than taking George the film creator's opinions with a grain of salt or perhaps questioning them, instead people, again, ironically, will go on to parrot this idea that Joker is being unoriginal.
Joker is just the Taxi Driver ripoff.
Very good. What he said.
Joker is just the king of comedy clone.
Very good. What he said.
Before we get any further with my views on this subject, let's first break down all the comparisons that Joker shares with Taxi Driver and the King of Comedy, just so we can establish what exactly we're working with here. Taxi Driver is a movie directed by Martin Scorsese. Throughout the film we see the main character, Travis Bickle, writing about how his life is going, and highlights some of the problems he has with the world, because Travis really wants to be living the better life. Our main protagonist often feels a little bit threatened in his line of work, so one of his colleagues advises him to carry a firearm. The main character feels so attached to this gun, so much so that they even hold it whilst watching TV. And speaking of, a lot of the characters' motivations appear to be influenced by the politics they see on TV. And then here are a few even smaller ones. Bruised back. Weird hairdo, pointing pretend gun at head. The King of Comedy is a movie directed by Martin Scorsese, in which our main protagonist, Rupert Pupkin, is an aspiring comedian. He even imagines him talking to a talk show host, who's supposedly his inspiration, and Rupert is determined to one day be in that same position, and talking to imaginary people is quite common for our main protagonist. The actual talk show host thinks our main character is a literal joke, but in the end, the talk show host is nothing more to the main character than a vehicle for their own revelation to get a spotlight on the show, in what is actually a quite serious situation with a lunatic being live on air. And then some smaller ones. A shot at the end of the film with a bunch of TVs in a store window. Red suit. So, those ones were a lot more specific than Taxi Drivers, but neither feel like enough for me. I mean, Taxi Driver is one of my favourite films of all time, and not only is it just fundamentally a fantastic movie, but it was also extremely revolutionary, especially for a film made in the late 70s. It set such an excellent standard for neo-noir films, and has clearly influenced so many brilliant films that we see today, including Joker. And I think it's pretty clear that Taxi Driver has also influenced films like Falling Down and You Were Never Really Here. But those two movies are also used as examples of things that Joker ripped off.
Okay, now here you're Travis Bickle. Now you're D. Fens from Falling Down.
Another film this really reminded me of was You Were Never Really Here. It's a really dark film. I think Phillips took a lot from that film as well.
Are you guys keeping up with this? But seriously, I would argue that both of these movies have absolutely nothing to do with Joker, and are more results of Taxi Driver's notoriety. And I mean that in a good way, like all of these films are quality pieces. Falling Down is about a man who has very much lost his place in the world, and as the film progresses, he slowly gets more and more frustrated with those who mistreat others, and wants to get back at them. You Were Never Really Here is about a character whose background is quite ambiguous, so creates a new purpose for themselves to instead help a vulnerable young girl from an awful reality that she's in, even if that forces them to go down a darker path. So this really begs the question, is Joker, Falling Down and You Were Never Really Here shameless byproducts of the classic Scorsese movie? Or Was Taxi Driver so inventive that it helped create new genre conventions and inspire so many movies after it? Because I'm very much leaning towards the latter. Taxi Driver does not own these conventions. It just built them up and passed them along. This is simply how movie making works. It's not a specific case with Joker. However, the King of Comedy definitely shares a lot more in common. An aspiring comedian trying to get into the spotlight, but being detested by the guy who actually runs the show, with a series of serious events leading up to this point, is comparatively a lot more of a specific story. So why is this a bad thing? Well, it isn't. If Joker had plagiarized this film, and I mean legitimately copied every single beat of the story, then sure, I would absolutely have a problem with it. But as it stands, there's more than enough to differentiate Joker. I mean, right off the bat, I feel like Arthur is a more complicated character than Travis and Rupert. Those two characters are very simple. Not bad by any stretch. Simplicity does not equal bad. In fact, I would consider Driver from Drive to be a simplistic character, and he's like one of my favourite characters of all time. But anyway, we don't know too much about Travis Bickle as a person, but his motivation is very direct. He feels like too many people suffer because of what others do, and he wants to be the one to stand up against that.
Here is someone who stood up. Here is...
Rupert Pupkin we equally don't know too much about. His character's only motivation is to be a comedian, even if that's just for one night.
But look, I figure it this way. Better to be king for a night than schmuck for a lifetime.
However, we do find a lot out about Arthur, and I would argue him uncovering his past are some of the most hard-hitting moments in the film. And a lot of the runtime is dedicated to exploring Arthur's mental state, which is ultimately the crux of the film. And the structure of Joker is completely different as well. I mean, Travis more or less never changed his stance on anything. He just got a little tipped over the edge and felt the need to act on them. And Rupert didn't change one bit. He always felt like he was a talented comedian. For him, it was only a matter of getting that golden opportunity. It takes Arthur a lot of interactions with people, a lot of events to take place, for him to change into the Joker. And the most literal example of seeing this change is when he walks up the stairs at the start of the movie. He has a very hunched over posture and is clearly looking very depressed. And then by the end of the movie, Arthur learns to let go and is gracefully dancing down the stairs. And another important unique thing that Joker does is the way it shows Arthur's influence throughout Gotham City. Compare this to the finale of Taxi Driver, where Bickle's actions were more or less just an isolated event. Or how Pupkin managed to get on the Jerry Langford show once. Neither of these events inspired other people to take action. And Joker is essentially all about that. And there are obviously more unique things I could point out with Joker, but for the sake of not getting too pedantic, I figured I'd just point out the main ones. But speaking of being too pedantic, that's exactly how it comes across when people discuss why Joker is a clone. Because even though we've established that there are significant comparisons, the vast majority of these comparisons are way too vague that you can legitimately do this with any film, and it will look like Joker copied it. Now I know, that sounds like a bold claim, but I'm going to prove this. Elf is a film directed by Jon Favreau, and the movie is about a character who's quite disconnected from the normal way of life. They also have a pretty unique career where they have to dress up, in order to both entertain and help the business that they're a part of. However, our main character knows very little about their backstory, but one day catches wind of who their father is. His father is a very wealthy and powerful man that's clearly dedicated huge chunks of their life to their career. When our character is in the city, they manage to meet up with their father, and when explaining the relation, the father in a state of confusion doesn't take too kindly to this idea, especially considering that the father has a wife and a young son to look after. There's suddenly a lot of weight on his shoulders now that he's met his fully grown older son. So I think that's undeniable proof that Joker stole every major plot beat from Elf, so chuck that film on the pile as well. And let's do just one more to really cement my point here. Fight Club is a film directed by David Fincher. It's about a man who is quite disconnected from society, who's quite jaded by the job they do, and even having a fallout with their boss. They are so disconnected that sometimes they even struggle to distinguish reality and their own imagination, to the point where they create people to talk to in their head. And our main character is in complete and utter disbelief when they find out that the interactions they've had with said person never actually took place. Our main character has nothing to lose, so they start acting upon what they consider to be right. And actually, their actions and messages are so powerful that they start becoming more and more widespread with their influence. Fast forward to the climax of the film, and our main character has generated an entire cult, seeing and praising them as some kind of god, as the streets around them begin to burn to a crisp. Hopefully what I've done just there is highlight how storytelling is often nowhere near as unique as people envision it to be. And there's nothing wrong with that. Art is all about looking at a piece that has come before, deconstructing it, and making it into your own piece of work. And the more pieces of art that you take inspiration from, the better. You see, people seem to think that pointing out more and more similarities between Joker and the films that Joker is inspired by is helping bolster their point about it being unoriginal, but it actually makes the point weaker. If we assume that Joker is taking a little piece from each film that we've spoken about today, then by default, Joker is an original piece. Now, is it the most original piece? Oh, absolutely not, but it doesn't have to be. I'm not a fan of this conflation between originality and quality. If we take something like Parasite, for example, sure, the film is a really nice breath of fresh air from the typical stories that we see today, but Parasite is not an amazing film because of its originality. Parasite is just an amazing film. And even if there were many films like Parasite before Parasite, my appreciation for Parasite will not change. I value writing, I value filmmaking, I value editing, I value quality. And to me, bringing up these completely meta reasons as to why Joker is supposedly bad only helps me love Joker more, because if the film was actually bad, the conversation would be about what's actually in the film. It's okay not to like Joker. Seriously, it is. But this way of criticism is not really useful in any kind of way. But hey, that's life, and that's all I have to say.